The boy who said the impossible. He was just a kid, 7, maybe 8 years old, standing on the edge of a crowded sidewalk like he didn't belong there. Like he'd wandered into a world that wasn't made for him, too loud, too busy, too impatient, for anything that didn't make sense. He had on a slightly wrinkled blue shirt, shoes with worn-out soles, and a quiet kind of confidence that grown men would pay money to fake. But what came out of his mouth next? No one could have scripted that. "I can make her walk again." Just like that. No hesitation, no apology. He said it to a man in a custom-tailored navy suit, crouched beside a little red-haired girl in a wheelchair. She looked maybe 9 or 10, thin arms, legs that hadn't moved in a long time. You could tell by the way she sat, not just like she was resting, but like she had been placed there by life. The man, clearly someone important, judging by the watch on his wrist and the tension in his jaw, turned his head, confused. Maybe he thought he misheard. Maybe he thought the boy was playing some game. But the boy didn't flinch. "I can help her," he said again, pointing directly at the girl. The businessman's brows pulled in, somewhere between disbelief and irritation. He glanced around, like someone was about to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" But no one did. It was just the three of them now. The girl, the man, and the boy, who believed in something no one else could see. People walked by. Cars honked. The city kept rushing forward, like it always does. But in that tiny triangle of sidewalk space, something had shifted. The girl looked at the boy, really looked. And for a split second, something behind her eyes lit up. Not hope, not yet, but curiosity. "How?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. And the boy smiled, like that was the question he'd been waiting for. "I see things. I feel things," he said. "Inside people, where the pain is, and I know how to move it." The businessman stood up slowly, towering over the boy now, adjusting his cufflinks like this whole thing was beneath him. He wasn't just skeptical, he was annoyed. "You're saying you're some kind of doctor?" he asked, almost laughing. But the boy didn't laugh. He just said calmly, "Better." And that's when everything changed. Because the businessman, for reasons even he couldn't explain, didn't walk away. He stayed. And that moment, that choice, would be the beginning of a story the internet still can't stop arguing about. The businessman's name was Daniel Cross, regional director of some high-end medical tech company. The kind of guy who took pride in numbers, not feelings. He didn't believe in gut instincts or miracles. He believed in data, charts, FDA approvals. If it couldn't be measured, it didn't exist. So when this little boy, barely tall enough to reach his belt, claimed he could make a paralyzed girl walk again with, what? Vibes? Magic? Intuition? Daniel was 2 seconds away from brushing it all off. But here's the thing. That girl in the wheelchair, her name was Sophie. And she wasn't just some random child Daniel passed on the street. She was his niece. Sophie had been in that chair for 3 years. A freak car accident took out part of her spine and left the doctors shrugging. They tried everything: physical therapy, stem cell trials, specialists flown in from overseas. Nothing worked. She hadn't moved her legs since. And Daniel, well, he was the one who paid for it all, who watched his sister cry through insurance forms and denied claims. He didn't believe in miracles because life had already proven they didn't exist. So imagine his face when some random kid just showed up. No clipboard, no credentials, just confidence. Daniel crouched down again, this time more serious. "What exactly are you trying to say, kid?" The boy looked him dead in the eye. "She doesn't need fixing. She needs someone to listen, and I can do that." It was such a strange answer that it actually stopped Daniel cold. Sophie tilted her head, watching the boy carefully. "What's your name?" she asked. "Micah," he said. "And I think you already know me. You've seen me in your dreams." Daniel's face? Priceless. His skepticism turned to full-on concern. "Okay, that's enough. Where are your parents?" he asked, scanning the crowd. But Micah didn't even blink. "They don't believe either," he said softly. "That's why I'm here." Now, people were starting to notice. A few pedestrians slowed down. Someone across the street pointed a phone camera in their direction. A businessman, a wheelchair-bound girl, and a mysterious black kid claiming he could work miracles? Yeah, this was viral material waiting to happen. Daniel felt it, the tension, the absurdity, the risk. But then he looked down at Sophie. And she was smiling. Not politely, not nervously, but fully, like something had cracked open in her chest that had been closed for years. And Daniel, for once, didn't know what to say. Micah reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, a polished stone, smooth and dark like obsidian. He placed it gently on Sophie's lap. "I'm not asking you to believe," he said. "I'm asking you to trust her." Then he looked at Daniel, and to let go, just for once. Daniel didn't speak. He just stood there, a man whose whole world was built on logic, completely frozen on the sidewalk. Because deep down, something about this didn't feel like nonsense. It felt like the beginning of something no spreadsheet could explain. By the time Daniel finally spoke again, a small crowd had gathered, maybe a dozen people, some just curious, some filming, a few whispering things like, "Is this a prank?" Or, "That poor kid's delusional." And Daniel, he was somewhere between embarrassed and furious. He crossed his arms, looked straight at Micah, and said, "All right, listen, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this isn't cute. That's my niece, and I don't appreciate..." But he didn't get to finish. Sophie interrupted him. "Uncle Daniel, stop." She said it softly, but with the kind of edge that makes grown men freeze. And just like that, the entire vibe shifted. The city noise faded behind the silence on that little corner of the sidewalk. The crowd leaned in. Because this wasn't about some boy showing off anymore. This was about Sophie. And for the first time in a long time, she looked like she had something to say. "I'm tired of being your project," she said, eyes locked on her uncle. "I'm tired of doctors and needles and people talking about me like I'm broken." Micah didn't flinch. He stood beside her like he'd been there 1,000 times before. "You think he's crazy," Sophie continued, "but he's the only one who asked me what I felt, what I wanted." Daniel opened his mouth but couldn't form a sentence. This wasn't the polite, quiet little girl he thought he knew. This was someone else entirely. Someone stronger, braver, and clearly done playing along. "Let him try," she said. "What's the worst that can happen? I stay in the chair?" That's when someone in the crowd chuckled. A man in a blazer, standing with his iced coffee like this, was some free entertainment. Kid thinks he's a healer or something. What's he gonna do, chant a spell? Come on. Another person whispered, "He's probably just doing it for TikTok." Micah heard it all. He didn't respond. He just closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in like he was centering himself. Then he walked around the chair slowly, stood behind Sophie, and gently placed one hand on each of the push handles. Everyone waited, but nothing happened. 10 seconds, 15. The crowd started to shift, murmuring. And then Micah whispered something, barely audible. But Sophie gasped. Not a big dramatic moment. No lightning bolt, no special effects. Just a soft, sudden breath, like something clicked inside her. She looked down at her legs, and then back at Micah. "What did you just do?" she asked, eyes wide. "I reminded your body it still belongs to you," he said calmly. And now it wasn't just Sophie who stopped breathing. The entire sidewalk went silent again. Daniel stepped forward quickly, voice cracking with tension. "Okay, that's enough. We're done here." But Sophie grabbed his hand and squeezed tightly. Daniel's face turned pale because she hadn't done that in 3 years. The crowd? No longer laughing. Now they were staring like they were witnessing something sacred, something impossible, and maybe something real. By the next morning, the clip had already gone viral. 30 seconds of shaky phone footage, A boy with calm eyes, a girl in a wheelchair, and a businessman looking like he'd seen a ghost. It didn't show much, just a moment where Sophie's fingers closed around her uncle's hand, but it was enough. The internet did what the internet does. Some people called Micah an angel. Others said it was a hoax. Theories flew. Was it hypnosis? A social experiment? A PR stunt for some new tech startup? Even news outlets got involved, labeling it the sidewalk miracle. But here's the part no one saw. What happened afterward? Daniel didn't take Sophie home that day. He followed Micah. Not because he trusted him, because he didn't. He wanted answers, proof, something solid to explain the impossible. Micah led them to an old community center 3 blocks away. Cracked paint, flickering lights, nothing high-tech, no hidden lab, just a quiet space with mismatched chairs and a dusty floor. "This is where I help people," Micah said simply. Daniel looked around, suspicious. "Help them how?" "I listen," Micah said. "I put my hands where it hurts. I wait, and then I ask their body to remember how to heal." Daniel let out a dry laugh. "You sound like one of those fake wellness gurus. Chakra talk, crystals, and fairy dust." But Sophie, still sitting in her chair, turned to him. "He touched my back earlier," she said. "Right here." She pointed to the base of her spine. "It got warm. Then I felt something, like my legs weren't disconnected anymore." Daniel crouched again, now studying her legs. "Can you move them?" "I don't know," she said. "Not yet, but I feel them, and I haven't in years." Micah didn't say a word. He just sat cross-legged on the floor like he was waiting for the world to catch up. Daniel stood, tense. He pulled out his phone and opened his notes. "What's your last name?" he asked Micah. The boy smiled. "Does it matter?" Daniel sighed, frustrated. "Yes. I need to know who you are, for my records, to verify." But Sophie cut him off again. "Why are you still trying to make this about paperwork?" That stung. Because deep down, Daniel wanted to believe. He just didn't know how. "I've had this gift since I was little," Micah said softly. "But adults never believe me. They think power only lives in hospitals, or money, or suits. But that's not where healing starts. It starts in the places people gave up on." Daniel looked at him, eyes narrowed. "Why her?" Micah's answer came quickly. Because she never gave up on herself, even when everyone else did. And right then, Daniel didn't see a child. He saw someone speaking with the weight of generations. Maybe it was just a kid, or maybe, just maybe, it was something else entirely. Either way, Daniel knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. And the moment he realized that, his world started to shift. Daniel Cross didn't sleep that night. Not because he was afraid, but because his entire understanding of reality had been shaken by a barefoot kid in a dusty building. By morning, the story had gone global. News anchors were spinning it every way they could. Boy healer? A modern-day miracle? Or medical mystery? The kid who might be realer than science. But Daniel wasn't interested in headlines. He wanted clarity, facts. He wanted control. So he made a choice. He called in a favor from a neurosurgeon he knew, Dr. Karen Healy, top of her field. She specialized in spinal trauma, had treated Sophie before, and was just as skeptical of faith-based nonsense as he was. "If this kid really did something," he told her, "I want it documented. Scans, metrics, everything." Karen agreed. Later that afternoon, they showed up at the community center. Daniel in another sleek suit, Karen in scrubs, clipboard in hand. They walked in like they owned the place because, in their world, they usually did. Micah was in the corner, playing cards with an elderly woman. He didn't even look up when they entered. Daniel cleared his throat. "We want to test what happened, scientifically." Micah looked at him, shrugged. "I didn't stop you." Karen stepped in. "Look, we're not here to fight, but if this is real, we need to know how. You understand?" Micah turned towards Sophie, who had wheeled herself into the room behind them. "She doesn't need to prove anything," he said. Karen raised an eyebrow. "This isn't about proving her. It's about you." That's when Daniel stepped forward and made the offer. "I'll fund whatever you want," he said. "Therapists, school, housing, you name it. If this works, if Sophie takes even one step, I'll make sure you're taken care of for life." But Micah didn't smile. He didn't thank him. He just stared. "Are you offering me money because you believe in me?" he asked. "Or because you're scared I'm right?" Daniel froze. Because truthfully, it was the second one. He couldn't admit it. Not out loud, but a part of him was scared. Scared that everything he believed in, all the degrees, the research, the logic, might not be enough to explain what he saw yesterday. "I'm offering you a deal," Daniel replied coldly. "One that could help a lot of people. But if you want to keep playing prophet, go ahead. Just don't expect anyone to follow you." Micah looked at Sophie. "Do you want to do the tests?" he asked. She nodded. "If it helps people see what I felt, yeah, I do." Micah finally nodded too. "Okay, but on one condition." Daniel crossed his arms. "Name it." Micah's voice dropped to a whisper. "If she walks, I want you to admit something on camera." "Admit what?" Micah didn't blink. "That you were wrong." Dead silence. Daniel's face tightened, but after a long pause, he agreed. And in that moment, the bet was sealed. A billionaire businessman and a barefoot kid had just made a deal the world would be watching. The tests were scheduled for the next morning. Early, quiet, private. Daniel rented out an entire wing of a high-end rehab clinic just outside the city. No press, no gawking strangers. Just Sophie, Dr. Healy, and a room full of machines designed to measure every twitch, every nerve signal, every heartbeat. Micah showed up wearing the same clothes from the day before. He walked past the sleek glass doors like he'd been in places far bigger than this, even if they weren't made of steel and money. Daniel stood by the wall, arms crossed, stone-faced. This wasn't about ego anymore, it was about truth. And deep down, part of him was bracing for the whole thing to fall apart. Dr. Healy set Sophie up with electrodes and motion sensors, her wheelchair parked in the center of the room. Sophie was calm, focused. She hadn't been this quiet since the day she met Micah. Micah didn't ask for silence. He didn't dim the lights. He didn't light a candle or chant in tongues. He just kneeled in front of her and whispered, "Close your eyes and remember what it felt like to run." Sophie inhaled. Then Micah placed one hand behind her back and another gently on her knee. For a moment, nothing happened. Machines beeped. Lights blinked. Then the graphs started to shift. Dr. Healy stared at the screen, blinking hard. "Wait, I'm seeing stimulation. Voluntary firing in the motor cortex. This doesn't make sense." Daniel stepped forward. "What does that mean?" "It means," she swallowed hard, "her brain's trying to move her legs." That had never happened before. Not in any scan. Ever. Sophie's eyes opened slowly. Micah leaned in. "You don't need permission. Just trust your body." And that's when it happened. Sophie's right foot moved. A small, clumsy, half-inch shuffle, but it moved. For the first time in 3 years. Dr. Healy gasped. Her clipboard dropped to the floor. "Daniel?" He dropped to his knees. Because that was all it took. One twitch. One undeniable moment to break everything he thought was true. Sophie looked down at her leg, like she couldn't believe it. Then she looked at Micah. "Do it again," she whispered. So he did. Micah didn't force her. He didn't guide her. He just stood beside her, and somehow, that was enough. This time, both her legs tensed. Her knees buckled slightly forward, like her body was trying to remember an old rhythm. Dr. Healy was speechless. Every graph on the screen was lighting up. "I don't get it," she muttered. "There's no medical explanation." But Micah wasn't listening. He was focused on Sophie. And then she stood, wobbly, shaking, but on her own 2 feet. Daniel let out a sound, not quite a cry, not quite a laugh, something in between. The kind of sound a man makes when he realizes he's been wrong his whole life. And right then, Sophie whispered 4 words that no one in that room would ever forget. "I'm ready to walk." By the time they left the clinic, the sun was just starting to rise, but it felt like the whole world had changed overnight. Sophie wasn't just sitting taller in her chair. She was glowing, her arms steady, her eyes locked forward like someone who had finally been seen, not just as a patient or a project, but as a person. And Daniel? He was quiet for the first time in hours, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from the weight of everything crashing in at once. His niece just stood on her own 2 feet. Not because of any drug, not because of some expensive machine, because of a boy the world still didn't know what to do with. They hadn't planned to go anywhere after the session, but Sophie asked for one thing. "I want to go back to the spot where I first met him." So that's where they went. The same street corner, same cracked sidewalk. Except this time, the roles had flipped. Sophie rolled herself to the edge of the curb. Then she reached down and stood up. No one helped her. No one held her up. She just rose slowly, shakily, but completely on her own. And this time, people saw it, in real time. A delivery driver stopped in the middle of traffic. A woman spilled her coffee. A teenager dropped their phone while trying to record. Because there she was, the red-haired girl from the viral video, standing with tears in her eyes. And beside her, the barefoot boy in the blue shirt, not saying a word, just watching her reclaim her body, step by step. And when Sophie took her first step forward, the crowd didn't cheer. They just stood still, like they knew they were witnessing something they'd tell their kids about one day. Daniel leaned against a light post, hands shaking, tears running down his cheeks. And in that moment, it didn't matter what his title was, how many degrees he had, or what neighborhood he came from. He was just a man watching his niece walk again. Micah turned to leave. But before he could, Daniel called out, voice trembling, "Wait." Micah stopped but didn't turn around. Daniel walked over slowly, eyes locked on the ground. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. "Like we agreed," he said. "You wanted me to say something on camera." Micah nodded once. Daniel hit record. And with the world watching, the man who never believed in anything he couldn't control said 6 words that made everyone listening go silent. "I was wrong. About everything. And him." Then he handed the phone to Micah. No conditions, no edits, just truth. Micah slipped it into his pocket and finally looked up at Daniel. "I don't want your money," he said. "I want your voice. People listen to you. Use it." And just like that, he walked away. No grand goodbye, no final speech. Just a quiet exit from the biggest moment of Sophie's life. And somehow, that made it even more powerful. By the end of that same day, Daniel's video had racked up 10 million views. No flashy edits, no music, just a single take. A powerful man standing on a public street, choking on his own pride, admitting that a child had changed everything he thought he knew. And the internet lost its mind. People reposted it with captions like, "This kid just did what medicine couldn't." Others stitched their own videos, crying, cheering, debating. Suddenly, Micah wasn't just a story, he was a phenomenon. News stations tried to find him. Doctors weighed in with conflicting opinions. Social media lit up with hashtags like "The Boy and the Girl," "Sidewalk Miracle," and "Micah Heals." But here's the crazy part. Micah didn't post anything. No interviews, no live streams, no merch. He didn't even have a public account. He just disappeared. And that silence, it made the story even louder. Because when you vanish after doing something people can't explain, you become a legend. Sophie, meanwhile, was adjusting to her new life on 2 feet. She wasn't sprinting yet, but she could stand, take a few steps, and more importantly, feel again. Doctors were baffled. Some claimed it was spontaneous neural regeneration, a 1-in-a-million phenomenon. Others said it had to be psychosomatic, triggered by emotional trauma or intense suggestion. But every theory felt like guesswork, because the data didn't match any previous case. And Sophie, she didn't care what they called it. "I don't need them to explain it," she told one local reporter. "I just know I'm walking." Daniel, on the other hand, became the reluctant face of the story, not because he wanted fame, but because he knew this wasn't about him anymore. He started showing up at clinics and schools, talking about belief, connection, and the blind spots in modern medicine. Not with arrogance, with humility. "I used to think power came from knowing everything," he said during a talk, "but sometimes it comes from letting go and listening to the people we ignore." He never saw Micah again, not in person. But every so often, someone would send him a photo, a blurry image from a small town, a crowded subway, a dusty playground of a boy with kind eyes and bare feet, standing next to someone in pain. And in every photo, the story was the same. He never asked for anything. He never stayed long. But someone always felt better afterward. And somehow, that was enough. Of course, not everyone believed it. With every viral miracle comes a crowd of skeptics, and this story had more than its fair share. The backlash started quietly. First, a few experts on Twitter dissecting frame-by-frame video of Sophie's movement, claiming muscle memory, claiming placebo, calling the whole thing a staged performance. Then came the YouTubers, the exposé crowd. Videos titled, "Is Micah just a hoax?" "The billionaire?" "The girl?" and "The lie we all fell for." Miracle or manipulation? They dragged Daniel, called Sophie a child actor, and accused Micah of being part of some elaborate PR stunt. One creator even went viral, showing supposed proof that Micah was an actor hired by a shadowy medical company trying to discredit Big Pharma. But here's the twist. None of the facts added up. There was no bank trail, no casting records, no company connection. And when journalists dug deeper, they found nothing. No last name, no school enrollment, no medical history, no trace of Micah at all. Just witness stories from across the country, people of all ages, different backgrounds, all describing the same thing: a soft-spoken black boy who showed up when they needed help the most and left before they could say thank you. People who hadn't spoken in years suddenly felt safe enough to share their pain. People who had lived with chronic illness felt heard and in some cases even healed. It wasn't about science anymore, or proof, or debate. It was about what people felt, what they saw, and more than anything, what they remembered. Daniel didn't respond to the hate, neither did Sophie. But one day, during a live podcast interview, someone asked her, "What if it was fake? What if he was just a trickster and the walking was all in your head?" Sophie leaned in and said something that shut the whole room up. "I don't care what they believe. I care that I can dance with my mom again. I care that I don't cry when I look at stairs anymore. And I care that a boy no one believed in me." There was no comeback for that. Just silence. Because the truth was undeniable. Sophie had changed. Not just her body, but her spirit. Her voice was louder, stronger. She walked differently, talked differently. And whether Micah was a miracle or a metaphor, his impact was real. And somewhere out there, that boy, the one the world tried to explain away, was still helping people who had been forgotten, still walking quietly into broken places, and leaving them a little more whole. Months passed. The news cycle moved on, yet the sidewalk miracle kept living in whispers, in shared phone clips, in late-night conversations between parents who were out of hope. You could feel it in ordinary places. A city bus, when someone offered a seat without hesitating. A classroom where the shy kid finally raised her hand. A hospital ward where nurses started greeting patients by name instead of chart number. Something subtle had shifted, like the air itself had a new charge. Daniel felt it most whenever Sophie burst through his front door. She never knocked now. She just strode in, sneakers squeaking on the tiles, arms full of possibilities. One afternoon, she plopped a flyer on the kitchen counter volunteer sign-up sheet for a neighborhood mobility program. No glossy logos, no corporate donors. Just handwritten lines and a note at the bottom. Walk with me. That was it. Somehow, those 3 words carried more weight than any press release Daniel had ever signed. But here is the part no algorithm can measure. Parents who had spent years second-guessing every decision suddenly trusted their own instincts. Teenagers who felt invisible started filming acts of kindness instead of cafeteria fights. Doctors who had grown numb to suffering found themselves listening, really listening, to the stories tucked between lab results. The ripple kept widening, and no one could trace its edges back to anything other than a boy whose last name no one knew. Micah never resurfaced on talk shows or conference stages. People spotted him in the kinds of places reporters rarely visit. A rural clinic where the generator buzzed louder than the heart monitors? A storm-damaged church that served more soup than sermons? A rundown skate park where a kid in a cast learned how to drop in again. The photos were always the same. Micah barefoot, hands at his sides, eyes steady on the person in front of him. No spectacle, just presence. Then he would vanish, leaving behind one undeniable fact. Someone felt lighter. Eventually, Daniel stopped trying to understand and started trying to participate. He sold his lake house, funneled the money into community rehab initiatives, and went public with his own apology, not the forced PR kind, but the raw sort that admits how easy it is to ignore pain that does not belong to you. People listened because they could tell he was different. Humility is hard to fake when the whole world saw you crack open on camera. Sophie? She kept walking, past her old fears, past the labels that once defined her, past every expectation of what a body like hers could or could not do. She learned to dance again, not perfectly, but with that fierce joy only people who have sat still too long can understand. When interviewers asked whether she believed in miracles, she smiled and flipped the question back. Do you believe in listening? And maybe that is the lesson here. Healing is not always about fixing what is broken. Sometimes it is about seeing what was ignored, saying the quiet yes that lets another person step forward. Micah did not give Sophie legs. He gave her permission. She did the rest. So now it is your turn. Where in your life have you written someone off as hopeless, too far gone, or just not your problem? Drop a comment below with the moment you realized you might have been wrong and how you plan to show up differently next time. If this story moved you, hit like so it finds someone else who needs it. Share it with a friend who could use a reminder, and subscribe for more tales that prove everyday courage can rewrite the rules. Let's keep the ripple going.